Welcome to the Allen Press webinar, Maximizing the Value of Print, Best Practices for Job Planning. I'm Joanna Gillette, Product Marketing Manager at Allen Press, and I'll be your host today. On your screen, you should see some general information about participating in today's webinar. I'm going to go over a few of these items very quickly before we get started. Our presenters will be answering questions at the end of the webinar. If you do have questions, please use the chat function of WebEx to direct questions to the webinar host, which is me, and you can do this at any point during the presentation. We're using Voice over IP technology to broadcast the audio for today's webinar, so please make sure you have the volume turned up on your PC if you're having trouble hearing. Voice over IP quality may vary depending on network traffic. If you're having trouble hearing, please call in to listen to the webinar over our conference line. The toll-free telephone number and participant passcode for the conference line are listed next to the green telephone icon on this slide. If you do call into the conference line, please be sure to mute your telephone. You can continue the conversation with us and your fellow attendees after the webinar on the Allen Press Facebook page. Here you can post a comment, share an idea, or ask a question. And of course, we also encourage attendees to tweet during and after the event using the hashtag APWeb32. Today, Justin Roberts and David Emerson will share best practices for print work. Even though publishers now have lots of options for delivering content, print continues to be a significant medium. We do spend a lot of time discussing other channels, and with so much focus on these other outlets, it's easy to neglect the basics of print. But a little knowledge of printing technology can go a long way toward helping you plan your press work as efficiently as possible. Justin and David will cover everything from color placement and signature breakdown to workflow and material changes you can make to capitalize on your print investment before their publication hits the plate. Justin Roberts joined Allen Press as an account manager in 2006. He currently manages over 100 titles comprising scientific, technical, and medical journals, as well as commercial magazines. Justin is a native of Norman, Oklahoma. He holds a technology degree in graphic communication from Moore Norman Technology Center, as well as a bachelor's degree in business administration from Baker University. In his time away from Allen Press, Justin enjoys spending time with family and friends, boating and water sports, and watching Oklahoma football. David Emerson also began his tenure with Allen Press as an account manager in 2006. Before moving on to become Director of Business Development. David consults with current and prospective customers, and when he says, talk to your printer, David really means it. A Kansas native, David holds a Bachelor of Science in Technology in Commercial Graphics from Pittsburgh State University. Off the clock, David can be found enjoying various weekend adventures with his family, tackling home improvement projects, or getting a dose of humility at the golf course. I'm going to turn the presentation over to Justin now to get us started.
Thank you, Joanna. We'll begin today by going over the printing and binding process. I know what you're thinking, not another presentation about printing. No, but we do need to provide a foundation for those that are not familiar with the printing and binding process, so the information that we discuss later on in the presentation will be clear. I'll try to make it as painless as possible. The four areas that we're going to discuss are electronic PDF files and proofing, imposition and plating, press work, and finally binding. We'll begin with the submission of print-ready files, or as we call them, PDF files. PDF files have become an industry standard for submitting documents for print. For this reason, many printers use a PDF workflow similar to the Kodak Printergy workflow platform. There are many platforms out there, but for today, we'll use the Kodak Printergy platform as an example. The Printergy platform performs automated pre-flight processes of PDF files. There are many benefits that come along with this process. Reduced file processing turn times, convenience, collaboration, accuracy, and they reduce the amount of time from file submission to proof review. On the topic of proof review, one of the added benefits of the Printergy platform is the Kodak Insight online proofing system. Insight is a user-friendly internet portal that integrates seamlessly with the pre-pressed production environment. It allows customers to review proofs anywhere, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. You literally can review your proofs anywhere as long as you have an internet connection. It's also available with an iPad app for most mobile users. Insight automatically checks for correct trim, bleed, embedded fonts, image resolution, and then it reports back any warnings or errors to the user so they can make corrections to their files and upload them again. The benefits of the online proofing system are expedited proofing, communication, and file processing. Next, we'll move into imposition or page imposing. Page imposing or imposition is the arrangement of the printed pages on the printer sheet in order to obtain faster printing, simplified binding, and reduced paper waste. Pages are grouped into sections, otherwise known as signatures. Signatures are imposed into groups of 4, 8, 16, and 32 pages. Pages are grouped for maximum efficiency, and you may be asking, so how is a signature imposition determined? Well, signatures are imposed based on several factors, including binding style, total book pages, trim size, and the correspondence of color to black and white pages if they're mixed. If you look up at the images that we have in the slide, you'll see in the upper left-hand corner we have a picture of printed sheets with imposed pages, as well as in the center section, image, you can see how they look on screen. And then in the upper right, there is a stack of folded printed signatures. So now we'll take a look at some diagrams and see how the difference between a perfect bound and a saddle bound signatures and how they're laid out differently due to the binding styles. So if you look on the left-hand side, you'll see a perfect bound imposed form. And on the right side, you'll see a saddle bound imposed form. Now initially, you kind of see some differences. One that I wanted to point out is just the relationship, how pages are laid out to each other. So as an example, on the far left of the perfect bound imposed form, you'll see page 4 on the bottom and page 5 on the top of the front of the press sheet. If you look at the same position on the saddle bound imposed form, you see they're different. You'll see that page 4 and page 6 are laid in relation to each other. Both have 16 pages, but the page positions are different because perfect bound page signatures are stacked in sequence during the binding process, and saddle stitch signatures are nested in sequence during the binding process. We'll dive into this further later on in the discussion and when we review binding styles. So after the pages have been imposed, they're ready for plates to be made. Printing plates are thin aluminum sheets with an emulsion coating. Plates are fed through an image setter that uses a laser to expose the area that will accept ink on the plate to be printed on the sheet. Modern plates are made using computer-to-plate technology, or CTP. Electronic files are sent to the image setter and are then transferred to the printed plate. If you look at the screen, you'll see a picture of an image setter in the lower left-hand side. And in the upper left-hand, you'll see an unexposed printing plate. You'll notice that it's got the solid blue emulsion coating on it. So then if we look down in the lower right corner, you'll see what a processed plate looks like. It's passed through the image setter, and the area that will be printed or accept ink has been hardened, and once it's processed, the non-image areas are removed from the emulsion coating. So to review a little bit, some of the added benefits are there's reduced time from proof approval to press with the computer plate system, and it eliminates the need for film processing, which in the past was a very labor-intensive and time-consuming process. So as an example, each side of the printed sheet requires one plate per side per color. As an example, a 4-color, 2-sided press form will require 8 printing plates, one set of 4 plates for the top of the sheet and one set of 4 plates for the bottom of the sheet. Are you still with me? Hang in there, we're almost done with our review. Okay, so let's go back over some of the processes we've discussed so far. So PDF files have been submitted and processed, proofs have been reviewed and approved, pages have been imposed, plates have been made, and now it's time to go to press. The three main press types used in the industry today are offset web, offset sheetfed, and digital. The first press we'll review is the offset web press. The web press gets its name because the paper comes on rolls and is webbed through the press in a continuous ribbon until it's trimmed and folded into signatures at the end of the line. Some of the benefits of a web press are faster speeds than a sheet-fed press. Roll-fed stocks allow for continuous operation without stopping for paper reloading. And that's to say, when a roll ends in the run cycle, it automatically splices into another roll that's already up to speed. Another advantage, web presses use heat-set ink, which reduces drying times. Folded signatures come out in line at the end of the press. And most web presses are what they refer to as perfecting presses. They print the top and bottom of the sheet at the same time. If you take a look at the picture on the right-hand side, you'll see a picture of a web press, and you'll see the large roll of paper that feeds through the press. If you look at the photo on the left-hand side, you'll get an idea of how the ribbon of paper feeds through the press. Looking at the right side of that photo, you'll see that it comes in as a blank ribbon of paper. It goes through the cyan set of rollers, the magenta, the yellow, and the black. And you can see what a four-color image looks like once all those layers of ink have been laid down on top of each other. The next press we'll review is the sheet-fed offset press. Unlike a web press, paper is fed through a sheet fed on sheets, not on rolls. The same four colors are applied, but the paper is fed through without the continuous ribbon of paper. Some of the benefits of a sheet-fed press are they can run heavier cover stocks. They typically have inline coating systems or clear coatings. An example of that would be aqueous coating, which applies a thin layer of clear coating on top of the ink, which can give you an added gloss shine, or it also acts as a protective layer between the colored ink. And typically, sheet-fed presses have additional units, so you can print special PMS colors or metallic inks. If you look at the photo that we have on the left-hand side, you'll see what a sheet-fed press looks like. It looks a lot like a web press, other than you'll see that a large stack of paper sheets feed through instead of a roll. Now, I want to point out that when we're talking about sheets of paper, we're not talking about 8.5 by 11 sheets of paper like you have in your office and you put in your copy machine or your printer. These are sheets of paper that range in size from 25 inches wide up to 40 inches wide, and there are presses that will even print a 72-inch wide sheet of paper. So you can imagine that is a 6-foot wide sheet of paper. The last press we're going to talk about is a digital press. The digital press applies 4 colors of ink, just like a web or a sheet-fed press, but without printing plates. It uses, instead of printing plates, it uses digital imaging technology. The benefits of that are, because you don't have to use printing plates, it reduces your cost, but it also reduces setup times, which reduce cost. Another benefit, it uses the same sheets of paper that a sheet-fed press uses. It can run the heavy cover stocks or the lighter weight text stocks. Because the setup times are reduced, digital presses are short-run compatible. And one of the best benefits, a lot of digital presses have inline binding systems, such as saddle binding or perfect binding. So speaking of binding, after the printing is done, it's time to bind the books. For books, magazines, and journals, there are 2 industry-wide binding styles, perfect bound and saddle stitched. Perfect bound or square back bound books have signatures that are stacked in sequence, glue is applied to the spine, and a separate cover is applied. Perfect bound books can contain more pages than a saddle stitched publication, and can even be bound with spine widths up to 1 inch thick and beyond. One of the other advantages, they have a separate cover, which allows for 4 additional pages of content or advertising. So if we look at the screen and we see that, and if you look in the upper left, you'll see a side view of a perfect bound publication. You'll see the square back spine, the interior pages, and then you'll see the outer cover, which in this case appears to be printed with a metallic ink. Like we discussed, the Sheetfed press has that capability because it has additional units. The last binding type we'll discuss is saddle binding. Saddle bound or saddle stitch books have nested signatures that are stacked in sequence and stapled together. The sequence of the pages will have the first 8 pages and the last 8 pages in the same signature. Some of the benefits of a saddle bound book: there is no additional cover needed for a saddle bound publication. They are self-cover compatible, which means the first page of the signature can act as a cover, so you don't have to print a separate cover. Saddle bound publications can contain as little as 8 pages, and saddle stitching or saddle bound publications are limited to around 8 signatures because the staples cannot pierce a high page count simply from the thickness of paper. But that varies depending on the weight of paper that your publication is printing on. As you can see from the photo above, in the left-hand side, you'll see a side view of the saddle bound publication and how it differs from the perfect bound. One of the main features you can see, it doesn't have the square back spine that a perfect bound publication has. And from the lower picture, you can see a stack of saddle bound publications and how they're stapled together to hold the pages together. So now that we've reviewed the printing and binding process, David is going to provide some information on how you can increase your print's value.
Thanks, Justin. You know, Justin mentioned earlier that he hoped that maybe he wouldn't be boring you guys, or maybe you'd be able to stay awake. But for me personally, I find the printing process really exciting, and I'm glad you guys got to take a look at this today, because just in the time that I've been working with print, which is over the past decade, there have been a lot of changes to the industry, and even before then as well. You know, it used to be back in the day, you'd have to actually shoot camera-ready copy. There was no desktop publishing. There was actually film that had to be exposed to plates. There was no computer-to-plate technology. And, you know, it's just amazing the efficiencies and different things that have crept up over the years. So thanks, Justin, for going over those things with us. You know, print itself is a very engaging medium. If you think back to the last few things that you read, you'll probably find that you retained the knowledge from the printed stuff a little bit better than you did on the digital stuff. There's certainly a perfect media mix for, or room for all these different things in your media mix, rather. But, you know, including print is definitely an important part of it, and I think it's a very engaging part of your mix. But, you know, today we want to talk about some of the ways you can maximize that value that you're getting from your print. And specifically, we're going to focus on production variables that you can control to bring your overall printing costs down and to maximize that value. Now, there are a couple different ways that you can increase your value, those being either increase the benefits that you're providing or decrease the overall cost. So we're going to focus on that second one today. Now, there are a lot of different ways that you can reduce your printing costs. You can reduce the amount of content that you're providing to your members, subscribers, and audience by maybe lowering the page count or lowering the frequency with which you publish. But, of course, lowering the amount of content that you're providing has the side effect of maybe decreasing the benefit that your audience is receiving, and any value you might have gained will be minimized or perhaps even lost completely. The same thing goes with reducing the number of copies that you're providing as well. Perhaps you might look to narrow down your distribution list, but again, that might have the effect of lowering your overall benefit and minimizing that value gained. So since these things require concessions to your benefit that you receive, let's try to focus on some production variables that don't do that. Let's look at some production variables that we can control that allow you to keep the benefits of your current print strategy, but also may have the ability to reduce the overall printing costs. So we're not going to look at things that are going to reduce the amount of content that you're providing or the size of the audience that you're reaching. Now, I have a few different ideas here for you today, but before I go into those, I want to stress to you that anything that you do needs to be followed by a good conversation with your printer. Any of the suggestions that you see today may or may not apply to your particular publication, but if one does that you really want to take a harder look at, definitely call your printer up. Tell them you heard this suggestion on the webinar and want to see if it applies to your publication. Not only are they going to be able to tell you whether or not that's going to be a good change for your publication, but they may also have some other suggestions that I haven't covered today that might be possible ways for you to reduce your overall printing costs or increase the value of your print. So definitely use this as a starting point. So let's take a look at some of these variables we're going to discuss today. The first being paper. We're going to take a look at paper and maybe a couple changes that you can make there that might be beneficial to your overall value. We're going to take a look at binding and maybe a quick change you can make there that will have some cost benefits. We'll also look at the page count of your publication, not necessarily in the sense that you're reducing your page count or reducing content, but just arriving at a more efficient page count for your publication. We'll also take a look at color, the amount of color within your publication, and where it's placed within the publication and how that affects your overall printing costs. We'll also look at workflow and proofing, what you're doing on the front end before you send files to the printer, and how you're reviewing the proofs your printer provides. And finally, we'll wrap up by talking about the distribution of your publication, the mailing, the shipping, and basically just getting it from the mail house or the printer to your subscribers and members. So let's get started with paper. Paper is going to be the largest contributor to your manufacturing costs for most print jobs. If you take a look at a recent print invoice or estimate, you might find that paper represents 30 to 50% of your overall costs, maybe even in some cases more. So that's a really large chunk of your overall printing costs. So let's focus in on it first and see if there's some things that we can do to bring that number down. The first suggestion I have for you today is take a look at the basis weight of your paper and see if making a small reduction in that weight will be beneficial to you. You know, a lot of publications will be printing on a 60, 70, maybe even 80-pound stock. If you want to just take a look, especially if you're one of those higher weights, like 80 or 70 pounds, at the possibility of reducing the weight of your paper by about 10 pounds. So maybe move from an 80 to a 70 or a 70 to a 60 pound. Reducing the weight of your paper is going to actually decrease those material costs. There's just as many sheets or pieces of paper running through the press, but each one of them is lighter, and paper is measured in weight, and thereby you're reducing that material cost. There's also a side effect to this, is that your only saving isn't going to be in the material cost of your paper, but you're also going to lower the overall weight of your publication. And lowering the overall weight of your publication has the benefit of reducing your postage and shipping costs. These are usually computed on both the weight of the publication and the distance that it travels from the mail house or the printer. So if you can reduce the overall weight of the publication, you're going to see a reduction in those postage and shipping costs as well. Another thing to consider where paper is concerned is the grade of paper that you're using. Most publications use grade 2, grade 3, or grade 4 paper. Paper grades run from 1 through 5, with 1 being the highest quality and 5 being on the lower end of the scale. If you're using maybe a grade 2 or a grade 3 paper, you might want to consider changing your paper grade down 1. There's not as much of a noticeable difference between going from 2 to 3, but there is more of a noticeable difference going from a 3 to a 4. That difference usually comes from things like the brightness of the paper or the amount of visible fiber that you can see within the paper. So definitely, take a look, see if maybe moving that paper grade will have an advantage for you. This is, of course, considering all other things being equal, so the weight of the paper, the make of the paper, and so on. There are a lot of other factors, actually, that go into the paper costs that you'll see, probably more than we could definitely cover in detail here today, but just a few different things that might have an effect on that paper cost is the manufacturer, the location of your manufacturer, whether they're domestic or overseas, the brand of paper that you're using, the finish of your paper, whether it's coated or uncoated, matte, gloss. Also, the recycled content in your paper can even have an effect on the overall cost. So definitely give your printer a call. You'll see the little red phone from earlier down there in the corner. That's going to be my signal to you that you need to call your printer and ask them if maybe there are some papers that they might be able to suggest that would be a good fit for your publication. Tell them that you'd like to take a look at maybe changing that paper weight or maybe changing that paper grade, but they also may, be able to consider some of these other factors and take a look at those and see if those will have a benefit to reducing your overall paper costs. So definitely call your printer and see what's available. Okay, let's real quickly talk about binding. If you're currently producing a perfect bound publication, that's with the square back as Justin showed us earlier, you might want to consider making a move to saddle stitching. It's not for everybody. If you have a publication that has a very large page count, it might not be a good fit for you. You may exceed the ability of the publication to actually be stapled. But if you have a page count of, say, around 80 pages, maybe a little more, maybe a little less, this could be a good fit for you. The main benefit that you're going to see here is that the cover is going to be able to print on the same paper and signature as the text pages for the publication. So that's going to save you that press run that you would usually go towards the cover. It's also going to save you, the costs of the material, the cover paper going through the press as well. Eliminating the cover may also have the benefit of reducing the overall weight of your publication. If you stick with the same page count and you take the cover out and you've got the same paper weight or maybe even a lower paper weight as suggested before, you're going to eliminate or not eliminate, but reduce the weight of that paper even further, or weight of your publication even further. You may also want to take into account the page count and color within the publication as well. So we discussed page count, but the color can be affected a little bit if you're moving from perfect to saddle bound. A perfect bound publication is going to have those signatures stacked on top of each other, whereas the saddle publication is going to have those signatures nested within each other. So it's going to affect where the color placement is going to be, and we're going to get to color here in a little bit and discuss that a little bit more. But if you're currently on a perfect bound publication, definitely take a look at whether saddle stitching might be right for you. So let's talk about your page count. The page count of your publication is going to be the primary factor in determining how the signatures within your publication are broken up and what the per page cost is going to be of printing your publication. So let's say, for example, that you have a 28-page publication. That's going to break down into a few different signature sizes based on the maximum signature size available from your printer. Depending on your printer and the trim size that you have, that signature size can run from 4 to maybe as many as 32 pages. So in the case of our 28-page publication, let's assume that there's a maximum signature size of 16 pages. That 28-page publication is going to be broken down into the biggest chunks it can first, and then they're going to get smaller and smaller. So first you're going to take out 16 pages, then 8, and then finally 4. And those are basically going to be the building blocks of your publication that are going to be printed on press, folded down, and put together in the binding process. So the bigger that you can get those signatures, the more pages you can include in each signature, the more cost-effective that signature is going to be per page. If you think about printing a 16-page signature as opposed to printing a 4-page signature, you're getting 16 pages in one press run where you're getting 4 pages in the other. So you may be using the same amount of plates and an equivalent amount of press time to get far fewer pages. So definitely take a look and try to avoid, at the very least, printing 4-page signatures. A 4-page signature is going to be probably the least efficient signature size that you can produce. So if it's possible, you want to eliminate those from your publication. But how can you tell if you have a 4-page signature within your publication? Well, assuming that your publication is either all color or all black and white, it's very easy to do a quick test and figure this out. So if you take the total number of pages within your publication, in this instance, let's say it's 64, and divide it by 8, if it divided evenly, you're going to find that you didn't have a 4-page signature. If you had a remainder, that meant that you used at least one 4-page signature within that publication. Now, if it did divide evenly, as it did here, then that means that you used at least an 8-page signature. So you might try stepping up and divide them by 16 and find out whether or not you did have an 8-page signature or not. In our case, 64 pages, again, divides evenly by 16, so we know that we used at least 4 16-page signatures. So now let's talk about color. We're assuming when we were using page count to determine our signature sizes that it was all color or all black and white. But what if we have a few pages of color throughout the publication? Well, those color pages affect the signatures as they'll be broken down as well. When your printer plans the job for press, they're going to try to break the signatures down into the largest sizes possible, but they're also going to try to include as much color within a single signature as possible. So you can make that easier and make it possible for your printer to create more efficient signatures by consolidating your color together where signature breaks will occur. So for instance, again, with our 64-page publication, assuming it's perfect bound, it would break down into those 4 16-page signatures. That first signature, let's say pages 1 through 16, we can put in color, and let's take the next 16 pages, 17 through 32, and put them in black and white. That's going to be a very efficient placement of our color because we've got all of our color consolidated in that one signature. Now, if we take those same 16 pages and space them out just sporadically through those 32 pages, we may have to print 2 full color signatures, where before we only had to print 1. That's because if 1 or 2 pages on a side of a signature are color, the rest of the pages on that side of the signature are color. So if you have color that is sporadic throughout the book, just understand that if you're printing color, that whole side of that signature can be color as well. So talk to your printer about the signature that your publication may be broken down into and ask them, you know, what's the most efficient use or what's the most efficient way for me to place my color? If you've taken a look at it and you've got some ideas of what that might be, definitely check those plans with your printer. Ask for their input. They know their equipment and efficiency better than you. So definitely take a look at it and ask them what the possibilities might be. Let's talk about workflow and proofing. If you are currently using, let's say, InDesign or maybe another page layout application and sending in a package of your page layout software, let's say your InDesign file, along with all of the fonts that you're using and the pictures that you're using, you may want to consider switching over to a PDF workflow. Whenever you're sending that package, as we discussed earlier, to your printer with all those different elements, they have the opportunity for reflow of the fonts or maybe errors, maybe something just didn't come across correctly. But if you switch to a PDF workflow, you can eliminate a lot of those problems and have a PDF that you know is going to look how it's going to look to the printer as well. It also makes for a lot easier transfer to your printer. You can upload a single file to your printer, whether that be to an FTP, or maybe you'll use, let's say, Kodak Insight, as Justin discussed earlier, to send that file to your printer. You can even take that PDF and put it on a disk if you like and send that to your printer. Either way you do it, it's going to be a much easier transfer because you have that one file as opposed to all the different fonts, images, and page files. And again, that just kind of takes away a lot of opportunities for processing errors, whether that be reflow, fonts dropping out, images not being linked. Since everything's embedded in that PDF, you know it's all going to travel together. So once your files have gotten to the printer and they've processed them and imposed them, they're going to provide you with the proof. Now, if you're currently receiving a hard copy proof, that being something that is going to look pretty similar to the publication, pages printed out, folded, and bound together for your review, you might want to consider switching to a soft proof or an online proof. The soft proof can be a PDF provided to you by your printer on your printer's FTP site, or maybe emailed to you. You can use an online proof, like, again, the Kodak Insight system, to go online and proof your publication. There's a lot of savings here, actually. You're going to have material savings because a physical proof isn't being created. There's going to be some labor savings because nobody's going to have to actually manufacture the physical proof. And there's going to be shipping and time savings as well because you don't have those couple of days that hard copy proof needs to move back and forth, and you're not going to have to pay FedEx for the overnight charges for it to come from the printer to you and you back to the printer. So there's a few different areas where just a quick switch to soft or online proofing can have some savings for you. So if it sounds like something that might work for you, definitely see what possibilities are available with your printer. Speaking of proofing your content, when should you be proofing it? Well, your printer will always provide you a proof, but you really want to have your content locked and ready to go before you have to send it to your printer, because if you make changes after the printer has processed and imposed your files, you're going to have to pay some kind of correction or alteration charges to get those changes made. Once the files have been imposed, somebody's going to have to go back in, take the new page, replace the old page with it. If there's been changes to color, they may have to actually determine new signatures. So there's a lot of different things that can come into play when you're making changes after it's been imposed. So definitely do your best to have your content locked and everything ready to go and print ready before you send it into the printer. Finally, let's talk about the distribution. One of the best ways that you can cut back on undelivered copies is to make sure your mailing list is up to date. Every time you have an undelivered copy that you've paid to have produced, sent out to your members or subscribers, and it doesn't get there, that's immediate value lost. So make it easy for your members or subscribers to update their address with you, whether that be through an online or some other type of form, or even an email address that they can send quick updates to. Just give them some type of easy, accessible way to update their address with you. Another way to keep your addresses updated is through doing an NCOA update on your mailing database. And what an NCOA update will do is take a look at your mailing file and compare it to the National Change of Address database with the United States Post Office. Anytime you may have moved in the past, you've probably either filled out a card or an online form to let the post office know your old address and your new address, and this goes into that NCOA database, which is then available to printers and mailers to make sure that the publications reach the intended recipient. So that update happens automatically to your list if there's a new address found, and then that information is also provided back to you for use in updating your database. You definitely want to make sure that you update your database with the new information. Finally, there are a lot of moving parts and pieces with subscription management, and if you're having a lot of undelivered copies or it's just labor intensive for you to keep on top of this stuff, you might want to consider if there's a cost benefit to utilizing a subscription management service. Of course, there's going to be some fees and charges from the subscription management service, but the cost benefit from actually getting copies delivered may far outweigh any of that upfront cost. So it's definitely something that you need to take a look at, crunch the numbers, and see if there's a value opportunity there as well. Also with distribution, what are you paying for your postage? You know, if you're publishing a title with a frequency of 4 times a year or more, you may qualify for periodical postage, which is a much better rate than the standard postage rate. There are some other qualifications that the United States Post Office requires. You have to show them the last 2 issues of your publication to make sure that you're mailing at the established frequency, and you also have to set up a permanent address of business. But you take care of those 2 things and fill out the application, and there's an approval process, and there is a small application fee as well. So there are some upfront costs and some upfront work to be done, but once you move into that periodical rate, the benefits can far outweigh that bit of work in the front. If your publication doesn't qualify for periodical status, you definitely want to take a look at what you're paying for the standard rate. If you're a nonprofit organization, definitely make sure you're taking advantage of the nonprofit rate for standard postage. It's out there, and if you're not taking advantage of it, you definitely should be. And the last thing to take into account when you're considering your postage is where you're mailing from. I talked earlier about how postage and shipping costs were determined by 2 factors, the weight of the publication and the distance that the publication travels. If you have a geographically located audience that you can move your printed pieces closer to before mailing them, you can save on your postage rates. Now, there's going to be some shipping costs to actually ship the copies there and then be mailed out, but the savings in postage can oftentimes outweigh that upfront shipping costs. So definitely take a look at where you're mailing from and see if there are capabilities for you to move the pieces a little closer to their destination in the mail stream through drop shipping and what the cost benefit there might be. So those are a few ideas for ways that you can maximize the value of your print by planning a little more efficiently and decreasing your production costs. But again, nothing here is going to beat a good conversation with your printer. So definitely, if any of these ideas sound like something that might apply to your publication, pick up the phone, call your printer, and ask them for their suggestions. Tell them what you're considering, and by taking your specific goals into account, they can best figure out ways to efficiently print your publications and support your organization's goals.
Great. Thanks, Justin and David. We do have some questions that have been submitted today, so we'll go through a couple of those. First, are there guidelines about printing on lighter paper if you have a lot of color in your publication?
That's a great question. There are a couple things to consider when moving to a lighter paper and color. One of the things that might happen when you use a lighter paper is that you might have a little bit of what they call show-through. So if you're printing full coverage color on a page, you may be able to see some of that on the opposite side of the page through the paper. It doesn't really have that large of an effect unless you're moving down to a very lightweight, but it can be a factor. But color usually is really only adversely affected if you move from like a coated stock to an uncoated stock. An uncoated stock absorbs the ink into the paper a little bit more and causes it to spread out. And what that does is actually make the actual printed dot get bigger. It's what we call dot gain, as it bleeds out from where it was printed. And the effect that has on your printing is that it makes the image a little bit blurrier, not quite as sharp as it would be if it was printed on a coated stock. So when thinking about switching your paper and the effect it would have on color, that's definitely another consideration as well.
Great. Another question about paper. A lot of printers have kind of a preferred or house stocks that they like to use. So do we see that most customers would see sort of a cost savings if they move from a custom or special ordered stock to the printer's house stock?
Your printer's in-house stock is oftentimes going to be probably the best price point for you. They can usually get in any special order stocks that you might want, but there might be some cost for stocking it on the floor. There may be minimum order quantities. There's a lot of different factors that go into account. A lot of printers have quite a few different house stocks to choose from, and a lot of them may be comparable to the specific stock that you're looking for. So I'd say definitely first take a look at what their house stocks are available and consider using one of those if you think it'll fit your publication. But again, there may be the possibility for you to use your other stocks, but it may not be as efficient of a choice.
Thanks, David. So we've talked a lot today about signatures, and I think we all kind of understand that a 16-page signature is going to provide sort of a more efficient vehicle for print. But is it worth adding extra pages to get from a smaller signature to a larger signature? What's the trade-off or crossover with efficiency where that's concerned?
Well, increasing the number of pages to reach a larger signature is definitely going to decrease your overall cost per page. But depending on the move that you make, it's probably going to have an overall cost increase for your publication. So let's say if you were moving from 4 pages and adding 12 pages to get to a 16-page signature, there's going to be some additional costs for that 16-page signature than there would be for just printing the 4-page signature. However, it's going to print more efficiently, so it's going to have a lower per page cost. So you're definitely probably going to want to take a close look, maybe at actually, instead of adding those pages, eliminating the 4-page signature. There are things that you can do within the content of your publication, maybe within the page flow, to tighten things up a little bit and pull those 4 pages out. But again, if you have the content to support it, you're definitely going to print more efficiently because you're going to have a lower cost per page by moving to a larger signature.
Okay. The last question I have is, when should I consider changing from offset printing to digital printing?
Well, to reiterate what David said over and over, if you're considering switching from offset to digital, or you want to know if that will increase your efficiency of your publication, you need to contact your printer and have a discussion with them. They can go back and look at the history of your publication and see what your quantities and page counts have been and whether your publication will be better suited for a digital press. There are many factors that go into deciding what press a publication should print on. Some of the main things are their trim size and their paper, but the 2 main factors for determining whether offset is better for a publication than digital or vice versa is the total number of pages and then the total number of total quantity that you want to order. Those are the 2 main factors that really determine where your publication should print. If I had to put a number to a quantity, I would say for digital printing, it's usually going to be 500 copies or less, simply because you don't have that setup time involved. But again, it all depends on your page count and your total quantity. So it's good to pick up the phone and call your printer and have that conversation with them. And I encourage you to request some quotes. I don't know of any printer that charges for estimates. So ask for those quotes and just to see what the dollar will be.
Great. Great questions. So it looks like that's all the questions we have for today. I want to thank Justin, David, and everyone who attended today's webinar. I hope you enjoyed the presentation and that you'll take away some ideas about how you might make changes to maximize the value of your own printed publication. And of course, if you're an Allen Press customer, we encourage you to call and have a conversation with your account manager or your business development manager or director, and definitely talk to us about the ideas that you'd like to explore more, or if there are particular ways that are a good fit for your publication. We will be sending out a brief survey that will include links to both the slides and a video recording of today's session. Please do take a few moments to complete the survey. We're always looking for feedback on how we can improve future webinars, as well as suggestions for future topics. And don't forget, you can continue the conversation on both Facebook and Twitter. That concludes our session for today. Thanks very much for coming.